to start out and talk about you personally. NT, is it really stand for New Testament? Is that your name?
Nope.
Tell what is your real name?
Nicholas Thomas.
Nicholas Thomas. And we're going to start out just personal information. Where were you born?
Oh, a little town called Morpeth in Northumberland. It's about 15 miles north of Newcastle on Tyne. And so in the northeast corner of England, Northumberland, that county, is the English equivalent of Maine. It's the top bit on the right. And so it's about a couple of hours drive from Edinburgh in Scotland if you go up and across the border. So I grew up in the northeast.
And I won't be so rude as to ask how old you are, but when were you born?
About 10 years before you.
Okay, so... So you're a child of the 50s.
No.
That'll work.
1948. Yeah,
1940. Yeah, that's
good
about
year.
10, actually 12 years before me.
Yeah. Well, okay.
Yeah. You were 48. I was 1960.
Yep,
So yeah, we're young.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah,
that's
we're
true.
young. Miss Helen, would you wave your cane? 93 years old. Okay. I'm always curious, and I think everybody else may be too. Tell us a little bit about your education and your growing up, because it's different over there than it is here in the colonies.
Yeah, it's colder for one thing, especially. Yeah, I grew up in a very ordinary middle-class home. My dad ran a family business which had been in the family since 1797, actually. I assumed that I was going to take it on from him. He was fifth generation, I would have been sixth, and he had no intention that I should do that unless I wanted to, and so he kind of gave me the freedom. My mother's family had a lot of clergy, Anglican clergy, and I was very used to going to church every Sunday and to there being clergy around and seeing family members preaching, leading services, etc. It was a very easy thing for me then, as a young boy, at the age of about 7 or 8, both to have quite a deep experience of knowing how much Jesus had loved me to die for me, and also of just being aware, not as a choice, but just as something you know about yourself, like, I like apples and not pears or whatever. No, I'm going to be a preacher. I'm going to be ordained. That was just something I knew about myself from very early on. There were lots of other odd decisions later on, but so that came with. And I went to a very traditional first school, then second school, what we would call a public school, what you would call a private school, united by a common language as usual, divided by a common language. And I made the decision quite early on to specialize in classics. I loved the ancient world, and I had the chance to learn Latin from the age of 8 and Greek from the age of 13. My regret is I didn't start Greek earlier, because you had to catch up with the people who'd done it sooner. But that then gave me the platform for doing classics as an undergraduate degree. And most of what I did when I was from the ages of, 7 to 18, was to play as much music and as much sport as I possibly could. And studying was kind of the necessary evil that you had to do when you were forced to. But then as soon as you were let out, it was either back to the sports field or back to a piano or a guitar or whatever.
So are you a musician? Are you
a very bad musician now? But I played a lot in my early days. I kind of passed it on to my kids. Once my kids got onto the piano and started doing stuff, I couldn't ever get on, so I just stopped practicing, sadly. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm intrigued for just a moment. Sports. Do you still keep up with sports?
The only sport I now play is golf, and yes, I play that very badly too.
Okay.
I only play maybe once, twice a month, which isn't enough. However, if you live in the vicinity of St Andrews, you have 10 world-class golf courses within half an hour's drive. Yeah. It would be silly not to take advantage. So, that is the only thing I do now. Occasionally, walking in the Scottish mountains, which I've always loved. A bit too heavy for that. I need to lose weight. I need to get some tips from you how to do that.
Not for me. I get them from someone else. I did not eat that donut, but I'll tell you, no, seriously.
You can tell he's a Baptist. It's Lent and he's still eating chocolate.
Yes. That's true, but I gave up liver and onions for Lent this year. Um, in fact, I've given them up for life. Now I can't talk because I've got this candy bar in my mouth. No. So you went to school. Now, so you're not like our class has a kindred affiliation with St. John Newland's in Hull, England.
Oh.
So I thought maybe you were a Hull Tiger fan.
No, that's interesting. St. John Newland's, that's an Anglican church.
Yes,
Yeah,
Melvin Tinker is the vicar there.
Yes. My brother-in-law, Ted Crofton, was curate there in 1974, something like that, curiously.
Wow.
He's now retired. He and my sister retired a few years back. But yeah, so I do know that church, but not for a long time. Hull is one of those towns that's off to the east side of the county and country, and it's not a place you go to unless you're going there. It's not a place you go on the way anywhere, or unless you're going to get a ship to cross the North Sea.
Yeah, I was taking a taxi to the train station to go to Hull recently, and the taxi driver said to me, "Where are you going?" And I said, "To Hull." And he said, "Why?"
Yeah.
And I said,
would be a good
"Well,
question.
because I've got a friend there, or a number of friends there." And he said, "Did you see the TV show To Hull and Back?" And evidently there are quite a number of things that it's not held in the highest regard necessarily by the taxi drivers in London. Anyway, okay, so a couple more personal questions before we move on. Tell us a little bit about your education when you left home and went to university.
Oh, okay. I went to Oxford in 1968, I guess. It was good time to be a student, 68. You know, there was all sorts of exciting things happening. And I studied classics as a first degree, which in Oxford is ancient history and philosophy. And you actually do the philosophy through to the modern period as well. So it's a kind of combined degree. And that was when I really discovered that there was such a thing as the academic life, which had been previously a closed book to me. I just thought you studied the stuff and then you went and did a job. But no, actually, I found both the ancient history and the philosophy very compelling. And so even though I knew I then wanted to study theology and go into the ministry, I thought, I don't want to leave this studying, this finding out about more and more stuff in the ancient world and how philosophy works behind. So when I then did a second bachelor's degree in theology, got that in 1973, I then started working for a doctorate. In those days, you didn't do a separate master's, you just plunged straight into the doctoral program. And but then I got ordained around the same time, got a job in Oxford, which enabled me to carry on doing research while starting ordained ministry. And so it was a bit of a rough ride in terms of starting family life and so on, but here we are, we made it through that.
And your wife, Maggie, wasn't able to join you this
Sadly.
trip. Regrettably, we were hoping to have Maggie here, and she wanted to be here, but she had some dental work, and it's not a good time to travel. So how'd you meet her?
Oh, we met through singing together in a Christian folk concert when we were students. Basically, I had a song that needed a girl's voice, or at least having seen Maggie, I decided that this song needed a girl's voice. And she perhaps foolishly agreed to sing with me, and though she was actually dating somebody else at the time, but friends who saw us singing together told us a year or so later, we saw it coming right there. So there was something going on.
Lennon and McCartney,
Well,
Tom and Maggie. It was just kismet.
well, something, yes.
Or kiss something.
Kiss something,
Okay.
yes. I'm really sorry she's not here because she hates me talking about her in public. She reminds me of things. I'll tell you one thing. I have a cartoon on the wall of my office where, as you come in through the door, it's right there, and it's a bishop driving away from church with his wife, and the bishop is saying to his wife, "Have you considered how much more effective my sermon would have been if you hadn't shouted, 'Ha!'"
Yeah. I'm always amazed Pastor David lets Beverly sit on the front row. This is interesting. So singing in a group, play guitar, play piano, music as an interest. What's your favorite hymn?
Oh, wow. That's a great question.
Just to sing to yourself.
Yeah. Goodness. I've always loved For All the Saints. Do you
How
know For
does
All the
that
Saints?
go? Would you sing
Yeah,
us a few bars?
No, because this is live streamed and I won't get the pitch right. I think you should sing us a few bars.
Well, I would if I knew it. You picked one
you
I didn't
don't?
know.
Oh, really? It's a great hymn which takes you through the story. So many of the classic hymns have a narrative to them, which so many of the modern songs don't. And when you make Christianity non-narratival, you deconstruct something. But there's two or three others that jump into my head when you said that. You need to know none of these questions have I any idea what's coming. So this is just what you get off the top of my head. There's that lovely one, Dear Lord and Father of mankind, forgive our foolish ways.
Reclothe us in our rightful minds, in pure lives, our service find.
Yeah, it's
in deeper reverence praise.
Yeah, correct.
We sang that a lot growing up.
Yeah. That's a wonderful hymn. There's a hymn we sang when we lived in Canada, which we did for 5 years. And I'm now blanking on it because that's what jet lag does, but I'll come back to it. I mean all the Wesley hymns and the Watts hymns and the great hymns, and there's some that you would know and some that you wouldn't. But those ones come to mind. Yeah, if I'm walking down the street and just wanted to pray about something, sometimes actually having a hymn which you're quietly singing in your head is a good way of holding something in prayer and working through it and so on, as well as just an enriching for oneself rather than letting one's thoughts go random.
Yeah. Can you give us a brief thumbnail of your professional life? In other words, you get out of school, you've been ordained into the Anglican Church. And we know you lived in Canada for a few years. You're a prolific author. Give us, though, a feel of what you've done professionally, when you've taught, where you've preached, how you became a bishop, etc.
Oh, goodness. Okay, brief. One of the good things about the Anglican Church, the way it was when I was ordained into it, was that there was a valuing of the combination of academic and pastoral ministries. One of my tutors at seminary said, you're going to have to choose whether you want to be an academic or a pastor. And I, sitting there in his office, I didn't say it to him, but I decided then and there that I didn't want to choose, that I wanted to do both. And I just couldn't give either of those up. And there have been several jobs which I've been able to do where I've been able to combine them. For instance, being a student chaplain for a while in Oxford, for a while in Cambridge, and then after Montreal, back in Oxford again. But combining that with being what you would call an associate professor in New Testament. So I'm teaching New Testament in the university, but also there's an undergraduate college with maybe 300 students, and during term you have services on Sunday and some during the midweek, and you're being a student pastor, but then you're dashing off to give a lecture or a tutorial or whatever. So it was that rich combination, but it's actually quite a time-consuming combination, so that for the first 15 or 20 years of my ministry after ordination and after my doctorate, I didn't write very much, but I was teaching a great deal. And in the Oxford and Cambridge tutorial system, you meet one-on-one with students who write a paper and they read it to you for 15 minutes. You spend the rest of the hour discussing it and explaining what they didn't understand and so on. And I think that doing that again and again and again, and trying to find ways to explain things to students who were bright but hadn't got much information about the stuff yet. You know, they could process things if you gave it to them. But I think that gave me a platform, so that then when I started to write more seriously, roughly when I turned 40 in the late 80s, something went click and I started to I had written one or two things before, but then I found that there was a lot of material that I'd been building up, which I could then draw on, and that's continued. So then when it came time, which was a surprise to us, but I was asked to go and be dean of a cathedral, Lichfield in the middle of England, in 1993, and we went and did that for 5 years, and then the way they ran cathedrals changed, and I wasn't going to have nearly so much time for my own research. And so we went to Westminster Abbey for 3 years, which was fascinating, as a canon at Westminster, living right across the street from the Houses of Parliament and so on. And that I think, you know, don't you say in America that everyone ought to live in New York once, but leave before you get too hard? You live in San Francisco, but leave before you get too soft. Well, with us, is that right?
No, all I've ever heard is that Lubbock is the hub of the plains, and blessed are those who live there.
Oh, well, there you are. Okay. One day I'll get there, but not yet. But London is like that. You know, you should live in London once and just find out how it works, and then quickly get the train north. So when I was then asked to go back to my home territory, which is the northeast, as Bishop of Durham, that was just a wonderful one. I know that place. I know the people. I know how that part of the country works. There's a lot of people elsewhere in England who don't know how that part of the country works. I was thrilled and very, very privileged. And Durham had a tradition of scholar bishops like Lightfoot and Westcott, and to follow in their footsteps tremblingly was just an amazing, amazing privilege. Then, of course, the bishop job gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It's any job you do that you're having fun doing, it kind of develops and takes more time. And eventually, 7 years ago, St. Andrews came knocking on the door saying, we think you should be our next New Testament prof. And we thought, no, don't be silly, we're in Durham, that is what you do till retirement. And then they kept on saying it, and I kept on thinking, well, actually, I'm not going to get any time to write over the next year or two, and I need to finish some of these projects. So we went, fatal mistake, we went and actually looked around and asked questions, and all the lights turned green. I said to somebody yesterday, in the Christian life, you get the guidance you need when you need it, not when you want it, and usually a lot later than when you want it. But you get it, and on that occasion, it was just bang, bang, bang. This is what you're going to do now, and we kind of, okay, this wasn't the game plan. Most people our age move to be closer to the grandchildren. We move to be further away from them. Why do we do that? That's just how it goes. So, but I love St. Andrews. It's a great place, and the golf is good, as I say. Mm-hmm.
Okay, before we leave the personal and transition to something else, I wanted to ask you a question, but to set the question up, I need you to tell a story for us. You told the story, if this is an okay story to tell and put on the internet, and if it's not, just pivot. You told me the story about the Archbishop of the Anglican Church, or Jeremy,
Go on.
meeting the Pope. Pope.
This is now a famous story because Justin Welby told this, and it is recorded and so on.
Okay, so you can tell this.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
It was extraordinary that the new Archbishop of Canterbury became Archbishop just after the new Pope had become Pope. So they were both real surprises. Nobody expected an Argentinian Pope, and Justin had only been a bishop for 1 year when they made him Archbishop. And so both of them had been catapulted into this sudden position of international prominence where, you know, they're in newspapers, they're all over the place, etc. And Justin goes to see the Pope a month or two in, because that's one of the things you do. Major church leader, you go and meet each other. And so they're ushered in, and there's translators there. And I've had this from the translators as well as from Justin. And the Pope and Justin Welby and the Archbishop sitting opposite each other in the table, and they stare at each other, and the Pope starts to giggle. And he giggles, and Justin gets the giggles as well. And they are both just shaking with laughter for a minute or two. And the translators are kind of looking at them. And Justin said, of course, I was laughing in English, he was laughing in Spanish. But and it was just this sense of the crazy things God does. It's like, what am I doing here? And they're both thinking this simultaneously and realizing that the other one is thinking it. And then the Pope said, among other things, he said, we should write an encyclical together. Now, if you don't know the Catholic and the Anglican worlds, that is huge. The thought that two leaders would say, now, what is there that we should be working on, that we can work on together? And what they've agreed they're working on at the moment is working to abolish child slavery in the world. You know, it's a major social ill, and you imagine these two huge communions getting together, saying, we're going to put our energy and wisdom behind that. It's fantastic. But the fact that they both came together at that point was both a wonderful bit of divine planning and just very funny. And you have to laugh when God does funny things.
And so I ask you just that story to set up this question. Where have you chuckled at what God has done in your life?
Oh, goodness. Ah, ha, 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 ha.
And he's got no warning on any of this.
No.
I told him, he said, well, what are you going to ask me about? I need to prepare. I said, no, you don't.
Well, yeah, I mean, God does have a sense of humor. Clearly. For instance, I'm sitting at my desk in Durham about 10 years ago, and the secretary says, I've got somebody on the phone. I'm not sure I got the name right, but it sounded like Francis Collins. And I'm thinking, Francis Collins, he's one of the great scientists of our day. It can't be him, must be somebody else. So I go through to my office to take the call. It is the Francis Collins. And Francis Collins is calling me up because he's read one of my books and wants me to take part in the Biologos meetings, which actually is one of the reasons I'm here in Houston this week. That's happening next week. And I am just astonishingly flattered that he even knows my name, let alone has read my stuff, let alone wants me to come and dialogue with him. And we have this great conversation over the phone, and we end up then at the Biologos meeting. And I had no idea that Francis also played the guitar. He's actually very good. And so not that meeting, but the second one, he said, you have to bring your guitar, have to bring your guitar. And so Francis then and I start playing our guitars together. And why have a scientist and a theologian at an academic meeting? And we're writing silly songs about Genesis and so on. And you just think, this is a wonderful bit of serendipity, of celebration, of something totally unplanned. We could never have dreamt it. I mean, he plays a lot. I hardly play at all these days, so I have to practice. I borrowed a guitar for this week. So, I mean, yeah, it's fun. And you say, thank you, Lord. This is an extra bonus, and I'm delighted.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.